And we come to a yearly event which fills me with great happiness and also with a certain sense of trepidation, since the success of this university is considerable, and I heard that from statistics only the day before yesterday, where I was at Stockton, where I could see by myself how our sibling has developed. And it fills me with joy for the sake of the university, but also with trepidation because my task becomes, of course, more and more onerous. But still, I'm filled with happiness on these occasions because on the right we have the families, the parents, the fathers and mothers, grandparents, great uncles, great aunts, nephews, nieces, cousins, and all the baggage that goes with a well-ordered family. And on the left we have a concentration of their hopes and aspirations, latent perhaps because they're very well behaved, but still very clearly manifest. And I don't see in this congregation, although there were in the other ones, one or two babies present. I welcome their presence always because as I approach second childhood, I begin to understand their language and was able to converse with one or two of them. In the last delegation, I was able to say, not today, they're shut today, but they'll be open on Friday morning. And the baby fell asleep at once, which is another thing they have to learn on great public occasions. But I'm very happy to be here, and I was meditating on the relationship between the families and the graduates. Only the other day, sitting in Geneva Airport in an aeroplane, which had been delayed, as usual these days, by flying control, or whatever they call it, and which also make air travel among the slowest in existence these days. And we were waiting, when suddenly a rugger team appeared, obviously having caught the flight by the skin of their teeth. They came down the aisle, panting still, and they had, from all evidence, not showered, and had also been celebrating some sort of victory in the changing room. And they arrived, and the third of them, I think he was the third because he had a large number 3 on his tunic, he suddenly stopped dead, looked at me and said, "I don't believe it, Chancellor." He said, "You won't remember this, but you shook my hands 3 years ago, and I mentioned that I'd admired your performance in Quo Vadis as I was shaking your hand." I said, "Well, I do remember you." He said, "You're lying." I said, "No, I'm not. I remember you because you're the only one in my experience at Durham who has mentioned Quo Vadis at that moment. Some have mentioned Spartacus or one of the Poirots, and I'm very honored that I should remember that. In the previous congregation, one young gentleman said to me, "You're doing a good job," which is really much more use than any reference to Quo Vadis. But I then forgot about him until we took off, when suddenly he rushed towards the pilot's cabin, didn't go in, but seized the intercom, which is a dangerous thing to do these days. I saw the Swiss authorities. They were very edgy. But even if he was a terrorist, he didn't seem to be a very efficient one. He seized the intercom and he said, "I've got an announcement to make. We're part of a rugby football team that's been doing the tour of Switzerland with demonstrations of rugby. And I want to announce we've won every single game we played, and I want a round of applause for that achievement." Well, we all applauded like mad because we were eager to get him back to his seat again. And he would really have been of more use on a flight from France the last day or two. But then I forgot about him, and the authorities in London Airport very kindly lent me a wheelchair to get around because it's rather too far for me to walk. And in the wheelchair, he caught up with me again as I was waiting for the passport control. And he looked down at me and said, "I think you were telling the truth. because probably I was the only one stupid enough to mention Quo Vadis. And it occurred to me at that moment that probably it was at Durham University that he had learnt to reflect. Because his spontaneity and his enthusiasm were endemic to him. He would never lose that through his life. But here he had had a moment without me, and he'd thought about what had happened in the plane, and suddenly a little glimmer of maturity appeared, which must have been learned here. It could have been learned nowhere else. And I admire this quality in Durham, which is both serene and energetic as a place, and a place I have nothing to do with the far northeast of England, have learned to love and being attached to, and I come back here every year like a rather cumbersome homing pigeon and find my nook in the Royal County Hotel and flutter about until I'm wanted. This has occurred on several occasions. You have a remarkable alumni association in Hong Kong of over 100 members whom I met for the first time. I was invited there before I ever accepted this job. And they were so impressive because they, all of them, said nice things about this university, which is extraordinarily rare to hear from people that have actually been there. And I thought it was great. And they, even on the last occasion, gave me a watch, which is also remarkable because I'm not a station master. And it was a watch made in China of Mr. Deng Xiaoping standing in front of a furled red flag, and the seconds were done by his arm saluting. So when the watch is working, it goes... Since Mr. Deng Xiaoping himself has stopped ticking some while ago, I thought it might be tactless to wear it here. But inside the watch, which is a presentation case, is a piece of marketing which must come from the West, I think. It says, "Congratulations, you are now the owner of a precious jewel. P.S. It is unwise to wind it more than 7 times a day," which speaks great confidence of the manufacturers. And I didn't want to bring it here and keep fidgeting while I was on the day, so I left it off. But again, that was Durham at its best, I thought. And in Athens, a woman came running up to me with such urgency it looked like an assassination attempt, except I wasn't really frightened because I'm not worth it. And she showed me a photograph of a blurred red object, which was me extending my hand towards a young Greek gentleman wearing robes who was absolutely in focus. And she waxed lyrical about Durham. She didn't pronounce it that way. She pronounced it in the ancient Greek way. Duramis! And also in Germany, time and again I've heard this. I love this family feeling because I don't have a family quite as large as this myself, and it gives me a feeling of cohesion and of pleasure to be here at all. And with the babies here, I feel comfortable because I'm getting on now, and the serried ranks of professors today enriched by some startling and welcome additions, but usually they sit there docile like sparrows on a telegraph pole, and they are really the most compassionate and lovable people, because as I started this job, one of them came up to me and said, "Look here, we haven't met yet, doesn't matter. We're forced to sit there in any case, so don't worry about us. Just make the same speech over and over again." And I said, "If you think at my age I can think of what I said last time, you're absolutely right." So there we are. And I have great confidence in youth, I must say. Well, simply because I was, like all elderly people, taken ill about 4 years ago. And it was a mysterious illness which no one in Harley Street could diagnose. Berlin University Clinic bombarded me with nuclear fragments, and I came out miraculously unpolluted. And they didn't know what it was, and the Lausanne hospitals, which are famous, didn't find out. And things came to a head in the BBC in a talk show with Melvyn Bragg when I suddenly began coughing. So distressingly, I had to be taken out because I was interfering with the wavelength and all sorts of other technical things, and was looked after by the summer emergency relief doctor of the BBC. All the emergency doctors were on holiday. It was summer, and it was a man of about your age, not collectively, I mean, a very young man who solved the problem immediately with very scanty equipment, just a stethoscope, and he put me on the right and saved my life, really, and then said to me rather shyly, I hope you don't mind this, but you're my first patient. I said, no, I'm absolutely delighted, because I've noticed that all the great professors who are nearer death than birth, they all had to look everything up in books, and many of them were even more venerable than that and couldn't find what they were looking for. And you passed your exams the day before yesterday, and you had no trouble diagnosing everything, so I have enormous faith in you. The only thing is, I would implore you not to lose that quality too quickly as you acquire a practice, if not in Harley Street, in Wimpole Street for the time being. And I mean that very fervently. All generations of a more advanced nature have faith in youth, because we are all hopeful that you will put things right where we went wrong. It's never quite true, but there's hope is absolutely always present. I'm not going to give you any words of solemn advice from a dotard, simply because I know that such advice has to come from yourselves, your own intelligence, and as soon as you notice something, you will at least remember it, because it will have marked you. Whereas if I tell you, you'll smile or even laugh out of charity and then forget all about it, which it deserves, really, because we're all different. And I can tell how different we are by sitting there and receiving your handshake. Some of you, yesterday, we had two giants in here in kilts, and they managed that step in one step. I've never seen it before, but they were on me before I was prepared for them. We also had some ballet dancers yesterday who walked in a very neat way with that waddle which is peculiar to them, and they took 8 steps to get from there to there. And I must say they were all very charming, but before they got there I was always looking at the next one because I was bored. So they're all different. Some people are satanic by nature and come up and don't smile but touch my hand and then grab it as they're going back, which worries me because I see myself dragged down there. And other people are smiling so broadly they miss my hand altogether. And how on earth are you going to give words of advice which cover all that? I would only say to you that when I was at my prep school, aged 7 or 8, I got a report from the headmaster, which I wouldn't have believed unless my mother had shown it me, because she kept it. And it said, "He shows great originality, which must be curbed at all costs." Things have, thank goodness, changed. They've changed for the better, and they're always changing for the better, imperceptibly, but they are changing for the better. And education, to my mind, is stimulating the imagination as much as forcing information into people, and also regarding the whole of life at school or at university as a kind of relay race in which you have to keep jumping hurdles. I don't believe in that at all. And I'm very pleased and honoured to be able to address a few words to His Royal Highness. I don't know whether he remembers our first meeting, but he was just about coming out in public, and his parents were, as usual, at the Royal Command film performance, and he came on behind. Now, the great difference was that Her Majesty and Prince Philip were asking questions, but they were very brief because they were very conscious of the time, and we had met them before on occasions. He was still very keen to find out and indulged in long conversations with each person, with the result that the Queen and Prince Philip arrived at the end of the line long before he was halfway. And they were standing at the entrance to the cinema, with a sign language which doesn't have to be royal to be understood. And he was just in front of me when he mouthed. And there was the first sign of rebellion, which I was I was keen to see, because I have the same temperament. And he was very kind to me. He said that he admired my work, which was very kind of him. And I rather blithely replied that I admired his. And he became rather cross, and he said, "Oh, nonsense. What is there to admire in me yet?" And I said I could never jump out of an aeroplane with a parachute if you paid me £1 million. And he leant closer and said, "You could if you were pushed." I've never forgotten this, and today, with the same militant modesty which he always expresses, he whispered to me as he arrived, "I don't really deserve this honor." And I said, in the same tradition, it was really a continuation of the previous discussion many years ago, I said, "It's very many years overdue." And I mean that, sir, because I'm very, very relieved that you found a voice to your opinions. And I applaud them, even if I don't always agree with them. The very fact you should mouth them and give expression to opinions which are deeply felt, I think, is a wonderful thing and a mature thing for this island. I think it's splendid. And I hope that this time you have not arrived by parachute, but I believe by helicopter, which is the same thing but a little more dignified. And this time you can be sure, sir, that you have fallen into a very warm and welcoming embrace at this university, which is very proud indeed to have you as a graduate. Thank you very much.